They said I was fired for working 2 jobs. But what they didn't know was that my second job was making sure they'd regret ever crossing me. A pause. Distant sound of typing. Rain tapping against an office window. I still remember that day. The HR manager looking at me with that fake corporate smile, sliding the termination paper across the table. "It's not personal, Olivia," she said, like firing someone was just another item on her to-do list. But here's the thing, I loved my job. I worked late, skipped lunches, carried their projects through weekends. And when I found out the real reason behind my termination, that's when my revenge began to take shape. Slight tone shift, calm but deadly. They thought they were ending my career. They had no idea they were giving me my purpose. Before everything fell apart, my life was simple. Not perfect, but simple. Every morning I'd wake up at 6:30, make myself a cup of vanilla latte, the kind that smelled like peace before a storm, and watch the sunlight crawl across my apartment walls. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I worked as a data analyst for a mid-sized tech company called Nexra Systems. Nothing fancy, but it paid the bills and I liked the rhythm of it, numbers, logic, patterns. There was something comforting about finding order in chaos. At the office, I sat near the window, right across from Megan, my teammate and the closest thing I had to a work friend. She had that contagious laugh that made Mondays less cruel. And then there was Ethan, our project lead, sharp suit, sharper tongue. Always pretending to be charming when the boss was around, but everyone knew his ego was the size of our server room. Still, I kept my head down. I wasn't there to make enemies, just to build a stable career. I'd even started saving for a little house outside the city, one with a garden where I could plant lavender. But life has a funny way of turning routine into disaster. Sound of typing fades into office chatter. One Thursday morning, I overheard a conversation near the coffee machine. Megan whispered, "Did you hear? They're cutting costs again. Management's looking for non-essential roles to replace." My stomach dropped. Non-essential. That was corporate language for someone's about to lose their job. I brushed it off at first. I had solid performance reviews, clients liked my work. But then Ethan started acting different. He stopped including me in meetings. He forgot to CC me on important emails. And one day when I submitted a report, he took credit for it in front of the director. I remember walking home that night in the drizzle, my shoes soaked, my chest tight. I kept telling myself, "It's fine. It's just office politics. Keep your head down." But the more I stayed silent, the louder the injustice grew. Pause. Her tone softens, heavy with emotion. And in that silence, I started my second job. Not one that paid in money, but one that would one day pay in justice. Music fades into low hum like a secret being born. The weeks that followed were strange. Everything looked normal on the surface. The coffee machine still hissed every morning. The same jokes floated across the cubicles, but something in the air had changed. Ethan started treating me like a threat. At first it was small things, correcting me in front of others, pretending I'd made mistakes I hadn't. Then came the accidental data deletions, the sudden shift in tone during meetings. One afternoon during a team review, he leaned back in his chair and smirked. "Ethan, Olivia, that report you submitted, did you even double-check the numbers? Because it looks like amateur work." Laughter from a few people. My hands tightened around the edge of my notebook. "Olivia." "I did, Ethan. Twice. The data matches the client's system exactly." "Ethan. Well, maybe next time you should triple-check." Silence. My cheeks burned, but I didn't reply. "Not yet." After the meeting, Megan caught up with me near the elevator. "Megan. He's doing it on purpose, Liv. You know that, right?" I sighed. "I know. But if I fight back, he'll just make it worse. HR always believes management." She looked at me with pity and something else. Fear. That fear made sense a week later. I got an email from HR titled, "Confidential Discussion." It felt like a noose tightening around my neck. Inside the small HR conference room, the manager, Clara, smiled that same tight, corporate smile I'd soon learned to hate. "Clara. Olivia, we've noticed some inconsistencies in your recent performance. There's also a concern that you might be working outside of Nexra during company hours." Olivia, shocked, "Excuse me? What are you talking about?" "Clara. It's been brought to our attention that you've been working 2 jobs." I blinked. 2 jobs? I barely have time for one. Clara leaned forward, voice soft like poison. Clara. We have time logs, Olivia. Overlapping work hours. Maybe you'd like to explain. And that's when I realized Ethan had been tracking me. He must have fabricated data, maybe even altered timestamps. I left that meeting shaking, heart pounding in my ears. Megan found me outside, my eyes glassy. Megan. What happened? Olivia. They think I'm working 2 jobs. She froze. But you're not. No, I said quietly. Not yet. The music swells slightly, suspenseful, slow. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark staring at my laptop, reading the HR email over and over again. Every sentence felt like betrayal written in corporate language. I realized then, staying quiet was no longer an option. If they wanted to make me the villain, I'd give them a story they'd never forget. Cut to silence. Only her slow breathing remains. Soft rain sound fades in. The tone becomes slow, intimate, like a confession. Olivia, voiceover. The day they fired me, the sky was gray, heavy, swollen with rain, like even the clouds knew what was coming. I sat across from Clara again, this time without the fake smile. There were papers in front of her, my termination letter. The words violation of company policy glared back at me like a scarlet mark. Clara. Olivia, after reviewing your activities and the evidence presented, we've decided to terminate your employment effective immediately. Olivia. Evidence? You mean whatever Ethan fed you? She sighed, not meeting my eyes. This decision is final. Pause. The sound of a pen scratching on paper, her signature sealing my fate. I remember walking out of the building with a cardboard box filled with my things. A small plant, a mug that said, "Do what you love," and a framed photo of me and Megan from last year's office party. People avoided looking at me. I could feel their eyes burning holes in my back the moment I turned away. Outside, the rain came down harder. It blurred the city lights, the world itself. I stood there drenched, clutching that stupid mug, wondering how months of loyalty could be erased by one man's lies. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights. I just dropped the box on the floor and sat beside it. The room smelled of cold coffee and rain-soaked clothes. Voice cracked slightly. I'd worked so hard to build a life that felt stable, something mine. And in one meeting, one false accusation, it was gone. For days I barely moved. My phone buzzed with messages from Megan. Are you okay? You should fight this. But I couldn't even face the world. I just kept replaying the meeting in my head. Ethan's smug smirk, Clara's hollow eyes, my voice trembling as I tried to defend myself. I stopped eating. Stopped answering calls. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. and just stare at my laptop, wondering how it all went wrong. Long pause. Her tone shifts, quiet but determined. But then, something inside me snapped. On the 5th night, I opened my laptop, the same one Ethan said I'd use for my second job. I looked at the data logs, the project files, the timestamps, and then like a spark in the dark, I saw it, the trail of his edits, the pattern of falsified data. He hadn't just set me up. He'd been stealing my work for months. Music builds slowly, from sorrow to cold determination. That was the night my grief turned into clarity. I realized they hadn't just fired me, they'd freed me. And from that freedom, my real second job began. Her voice hardens, calm but dangerous. This time I wasn't going to cry. This time I was going to make sure every single person who betrayed me would taste their own medicine slowly. Fade out with the sound of thunder rolling in the distance. A low, methodical beat underlies the scene. The sound of keys tapping steadily. The hiss of a kettle boiling in the background. Olivia, voiceover. When you've spent years digging into datasets and finding patterns no one else sees, you learn to trust the trail. Numbers don't lie, people do. And the more I stared at those corrupted timestamps, the clearer the picture became. I made myself a cup of black coffee, bitter enough to wake the part of me that had been numb, and set up a small command center on my kitchen table. My laptop, a notebook full of scribbled timelines, a folder labeled E for Ethan, and my phone with a list of names. The apartment smelled like burnt coffee and old paper. The city hummed faintly beyond the window. First rule of revenge: gather facts, not feelings. I opened the project archive and began to reconstruct every file I'd worked on for the past year, version by version, commit by commit. Took hours. Sometimes I had to stop and breathe, because every recovered timestamp felt like pulling a thread that might unravel an entire lie. She speaks aloud to herself, a habit that steadies her. Olivia, soft OK. February 12th, client report. Original file. Olivia _final_3. Ethan final appears at 10:02 a.m. Server log shows edits at 10:03 a.m. from Ethan's workstation. But the email shows he claimed authorship at 9:59. Little discrepancies glowed like red flags. A missing audit trail here, a copied paragraph there, a misattributed credit note. He'd been siphoning my work and rewriting the story so it looked like his. Worse, he'd fabricated time overlaps to make it appear I'd been working for someone else during company hours. I needed witnesses. I needed corroboration. And most of all, I needed someone who still believed in me. Soft knock on the door. Olivia freezes. The kettle hisses. Megan stood in the doorway, rain still clinging to her hair. She held 2 paper cups, one for her, one for me. Her face was pale but determined. Megan. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about you. I swallowed. I'm glad you came. We spread the evidence across my coffee table like contraband screen captures, email headers, metadata logs. Megan's hands trembled when she pointed to a file. Megan. I remember this. He took credit for that presentation, said he pulled an all-nighter. He lied. Her voice cracked. This time it was her hurt, not mine. She became my ally in small but vital ways. She had access to internal chat logs I didn't. Casual messages where Ethan bragged about owning projects. She dug up performance reviews he'd manipulated, praising the initiative he'd stolen from me. Each piece fit together until a picture of theft and deceit emerged sharp as a photograph. Next rule of revenge: use their tools against them. I set up a secure drive, encrypted everything, and created a timeline that matched every supposed overlap Ethan had manufactured with the real-world timestamps from server logs and client submissions. I labeled each section clearly: Proof A, Proof B, Pattern of theft. But evidence alone wouldn't be enough. HR loved neat packages. Complaints, signed statements, incontrovertible proof. I needed an audience that couldn't be ignored. I thought about legal counsel, but lawyers cost money I didn't have. Instead, I started drafting an email, not to HR, not yet, to the company's board and a few key clients who had been affected by Ethan's corrections. Her fingers pause over the keyboard. The camera lingers on her face, lit by the laptop glow. I hesitated. If I pushed too soon, they'd bury the evidence. If I waited too long, they'd delete what I'd found. Timing mattered. Mini cliffhanger, soft, urgent. So I did what any good data analyst would do. I set a trigger. At 9 a.m. on Monday, a carefully constructed packet, with all the proof, a clear narrative, and a polite, devastating subject line, would be sent to people who could no longer pretend ignorance. And then I waited. End with the sound of the sent mail draft closing, like a held breath before a storm. The morning is electric. A low static in the air, the city still wet from last night's rain. My phone buzzes like a heartbeat against the table. The kettle hisses. Sunlight slices through the blinds in angular bands. Olivia, voiceover. I woke up before dawn. Less from nerves and more from the strange calm that follows a decision. I dressed in the same plain sweater I'd worn at the office the day they let me go. A small silent joke to myself. And made coffee that was too strong to be polite. The smell was sharp, a bitter comfort. At 8:58 a.m. I hit send. Close up on the screen. An email subject line that reads, Urgent. Evidence of misconduct. Project documentation attached. The cursor blinks once, twice, and then the message is gone into the ether. I didn't send it to HR. I sent it where it could not be ignored. The board members, 3 major clients who'd paid for deliverables Ethan had taken credit for, and a senior manager who had always pretended to care. Attached, the timeline, the metadata, the chat logs, the screenshots, a concise narrative titled, How I Was Framed. I wrote it in plain language, no accusations without proof, and I signed it, Olivia, former data analyst, Nexera Systems. A beat. The city outside the window carries on. The sound of a bicycle bell whistles past. Within minutes, the first reply lands. A client writes, This explains so much. We have questions for Nexera. Another, Please schedule a call. We need answers now. My inbox pings until it feels like rain on a tin roof. Mr. Davidson from the board replies with one sentence. Please come to the office today. At Nexera, the fluorescent light seemed harsher than usual. I watched the live updates from my kitchen. Justin, a contact in the client relations team, forwarded messages. Claire from legal typed in all caps for the first time I'd ever seen. We need to meet. Cut to the office conference room. Ethan is sweating under the bright lights, suit jacket clutched in his hands. Clara's mouth is a thin line. The CEO, a man whose calm I'd once mistaken for intelligence, looks like he's been punched. CEO. Ethan, can you explain these timestamps? Ethan, stammering, there must be a mistake. I handled the submission. Clara. The logs show edits from your workstation at 10:03. The client received the file at 9:58. You claimed authorship at 9:59. Silence, heavy as a curtain. They scramble. They ask for backups, for audit trails, for explanations that sound like defenses. The company's PR team drafts a placating message. The legal counsel suggests a quiet internal investigation. But the clients are not interested in quiet. They demand calls. They demand refunds. They demand accountability. Meanwhile, my phone lights up with messages from Megan. Megan texts, they called me. I told them the truth. Olivia, voiceover, you did. Megan text, yes. I sent your screenshots. I told them how he took credit. I lean back, coffee cooling on my tongue. There is a vindicating heat that rises not from anger but from being seen. Mini cliffhanger, the tone tightens. At noon, a push notification. Nexera announces temporary suspension of Ethan pending investigation. My chest loosens in a way that feels like exhaling after holding my breath underwater. The news spreads, an internal memo, an urgent client meeting whispers down the hallway. The same people who had glanced past me now stare at the empty chair Ethan left behind. But revenge wasn't only about suspension. It was about restoring the story that had been stolen. Within hours, clients sent emails to their networks. Suppliers asked questions, and one by one, the small lies Ethan had built began to crumble under the weight of truth. My voice softens, with a tremor of something like relief and grief braided together. This wasn't a triumphal march. It was a quiet unmasking, precise, surgical, and utterly human. I watched it unfold from the safety of my kitchen. But every time a message chimed confirming another client's doubt, it felt like a small bell ringing for justice. And with a pause, thunder rolls faintly in the distance. There was still more to come. Clearing my name was only the beginning. The company could rebuild systems, patch policies, and apologize. But some things, like the way people trust or the marks left on a reputation, require a different kind of repair. As the rain poured down outside, Sarah stood before the board of directors, her hands trembling, but her voice steady. Sarah. For months I was accused of betraying this company. But tonight, I'll show you who the real traitor is. Gasps filled the room as she projected the evidence onto the large screen. Encrypted emails, secret transfers, and messages between Mark and the rival corporation. Board member. Mark, is this true? Mark, nervous laugh. That's ridiculous. She's fabricating everything. But then security entered, holding a printed document, a signed confession from Mark's assistant, who had come clean after guilt ate her alive. Mark's face went pale. He tried to speak, but words failed him. The room erupted in whispers. Anger, betrayal, disbelief. Sarah, coldly. You ruined my reputation, cost me my friends, and almost destroyed my career, all to climb a little higher. Congratulations, Mark. You finally reached the top of the list of people no one will ever trust again. As the board voted unanimously to fire Mark, Sarah turned away, feeling both vindicated and empty. Revenge wasn't sweet, it was heavy. But she walked out of that room with her head held high, knowing the truth had finally won. Weeks passed since that fateful meeting. The office had returned to its usual rhythm, but Sarah felt different, stronger, wiser, and calmer. She sat by the window of her new office, the skyline glowing beneath the morning sun. Her phone buzzed with messages of congratulations, job offers, and apologies from people who once doubted her. But she didn't smile, not yet. Sarah, to herself, revenge gives you justice, but forgiveness gives you peace. Her best friend Emily entered, holding 2 cups of coffee. Emily. So, boss lady, how does it feel to be the new director of operations? Sarah, smirking softly, it feels right. But not because I won. Because I didn't lose myself. They clinked cups and laughed, a sound Sarah hadn't heard from herself in months. Then Emily handed her an envelope. Emily, this came for you. Inside was a short note, written in familiar handwriting. I was wrong. I let greed destroy everything. I'm leaving the city. I hope someday you can forgive me. Mark. Sarah folded the letter, placed it in her drawer, and whispered, Sarah. I already have. The camera slowly pulled back as she gazed out the window, the city alive with possibilities. Her voice echoed softly. Narration. Sometimes the best revenge isn't making them pay. It's proving you can rise above it all.